and welcome back to Law and Order. What does it really take for a foreign business to successfully expand into Canada or the United States? It's not just about registering a company, it's about navigating immigration pathways, HR compliance, tax exposure, and protecting your business from day one. Today, we break that down step by step. Welcome to Law and Order, where law, business, and global mobility intersect. I'm your host, and joining me today are three experts. Leona Wilson, president of the Armillary Business Group.
Hello, everybody.
Gagan Mundra, barrister and solicitor at Visa Serve Immigration Law PC.
Thank you for having us on this show, and thank you for orchestrating this podcast today, Mehak.
David Nackman of the NPZ Law Group.
Hi, Mehak. Greetings. Looking forward.
Let's get into it. So I'm going to start with Leona. Leona, what are the first HR priorities for a business owner who is relocating?
I think first and foremost, they're going to have to think about who their first team members are going to be. And, from there, from an HR perspective, often the first professionals that are going to be brought on board are going to be the lawyers, the corporate lawyers, the immigration lawyers, and then, of course, the accountants will be there. Usually HR is added on later, which is a little bit problematic because usually by then they've already made a few hires. And so they could already be a little bit behind before they've even gotten started, because really there's an importance to understanding what will be the employment status and, how will they differentiate between employees and perhaps independent contractors, given that the rules are so different from country to country. So it's unfortunate, but HR usually is coming in already a little bit behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much for kicking our discussion off into such an insightful direction, Leona. That really sets the tone because before growth and hiring, it's about building a compliant and stable foundation. Gagan, moving on to you. What should an employer consider when expanding business operations in Canada?
That's such a great question. And right on top of my head, when I'm thinking, what should the employer think when they are expanding business, I would put my finger on trade relations. What are the trade relations between different countries? I would bring in, for example, we have Canada has about trade agreements with about 15 different countries, which includes, of course, US, Mexico, Chile, and we have UK, Colombia, European Union, and so on. Now, it's very important first to find out that if you are from one of these countries, how are you going to set up your business? Because these agreements really are instrumental and helpful in setting up your businesses in Canada. You could be using so many other different immigration paths, which are so much convenient and so much tuned to make these managers or specialized knowledge individuals move to Canada faster, explore business opportunities out here, and then, of course, economic growth for sure. I also look into what is the nature of business. What are you trying to establish here? Is it the same business entity, same business nature that you have back home, or is it something else that you're bringing in? Are you a corporate or a not-for-profit corporation? Those are again some of the key pointers that I would like to explore with my client when the first thing that they say, we want to set up business up here in Canada. Over to you, Mehak.
And I guess this is where HR and immigration start to intersect because your hiring strategy depends on your legal and regulatory setup. Moving forward with David, if we are expanding foreign business operations into the United States, what cultural sensitivity issues should the foreign businesses be aware of?
Yeah, so thank you, Mehak. And I have to say that when I was preparing to answer some of these questions, I actually did sort of a little bit of a flip side on the analysis. But I think that the flip side of the analysis is tremendously helpful in helping our listeners understand one of the most important things. And before I get to that, I just want to say, Leona, you have always been in the forefront. You're never behind. Even if you're saying that HR is the last, it's always good to have HR up front, because the issue that I'm going to discuss is really one of the most important things that the HR managers are always focused on, and that is cultural sensitivities. And, I can speak from personal experience because we expanded our operations into Canada. And so one of the things that, you have to know is you have to be familiar with certain things about business etiquette in a foreign country. Expanding into a foreign country is not really for everyone, and you really need to look and see whether you are capable of dealing with business etiquette in a foreign country. So, a couple of the things that I unearthed as I was doing some research is how interesting it is where Canadians value politeness, modesty, punctuality, and consensus building, whereas that's not so true in the United States. In fact, when you're doing marketing in the United States, you tend to find that it's a much more aggressive sort of thing, whereas in Canada, it's very subdued, so completely different. So these are things that, if a business is going to expand in a foreign country, it's so important to at least get some footing and to know what the business etiquettes and the expectations are when you're going to be doing that. Back to you, Mehak.
Thank you for that overview, David, and especially since culture is often underestimated, but it directly impacts hiring, client relationships, and long-term integration into the market. Moving forward, talking about structure and execution, Leona, do you need local HR support, or can your existing team handle these things?
It's a great question. Thank you. And I think it really depends on who your existing team is. I would say in most cases, you should have somebody local, because somebody local is going to be far more aware of the nuances of the legislation, of those cultural elements that David has mentioned. That really comes through in the employee relations model. And there are so many differences between countries. Just as an example, in Canada, the minimum number of people that you need to create a group benefits plan is 3. In the US, it's 20. The number of individuals is so much greater in the US. It really requires a little bit of a different approach. And, people are not really thinking about, well, what about the distances? How comfortable are people to commute, for instance? What's the size of the talent pool? Can I be as picky in one jurisdiction as I might be in the other, just by virtue of the number of candidates, and how are skills measured? These are all very, very different issues. And I think the local perspective is important. When we start to dive into the details, particularly in Canada, terminations are so different in the Canadian context than what they are in the US. I think in the US, it just seems like it is so much simpler than if we have to do that, in the Canadian context. And, having a good, clear understanding of how the laws are intersecting and which laws are you even covered by. It is a complex thing. For instance, in the area of transportation, if you are only transporting within the province, then you're under provincial employment standards legislation. But if you're transporting across the border or internationally, then you're under federal legislation, which is a completely different thing altogether. So I think in that way, people would be better off to have somebody local, even if it's just on a consultancy basis, to guide and to help and to sort of put on the roadmap for people, where are the corners that we really need to be looking around. Thank you.
That's extremely valuable, Leona, especially the few nuances that it takes, somebody local to really understand the landscape. Moving forward, Gagan, how far in advance should employers start planning?
That's again a great question, and I'm going to pick up from Leona's uh, comments about whether it's provincial, whether it's federal, and you have to be so super careful about it. Now, when we are advancing and when you're looking to set up your business in Canada, this is one of the start points, I would say. Are you setting a business? In which province are you going to set up your business? Or are you going to make it a federal in nature? So that's important, not just from your business perspective. Are you catering the community that's very local, or are you catering your business that's more national in nature? So that's one point which is important. And setting up the business, whether in province or in on the federal basis, that's an important criteria that the beginners or anybody who's setting up the business has to be looking through. Now, coming again to the similar point is, does your business require any license or any permits to run it in whether it's in province or federally regulated? Now, for example, if you are looking to sell medical devices, that definitely requires licensing from Health Canada, and you have to make sure that there is safety, effectiveness, labeling requirements, everything has to meet. If you're advertising, that also is connected with the prior permissions from various authorities. So these are very tightly knit regulatory authorities that once you are looking to sell your product in Canada, you have to be super careful and have to do that homework well in advance. Another part is, which is evolving, is AI products. Are you using AI um, in your any of your products, etc., services, mostly? So if you are using AI in your services, then again, maybe we don't have those laws, regulations laid out, I would say, for the legal atmosphere. In our legal arena, we see that the courts giving out the authorities or giving out the regulations that if the lawyer is using AI, they have to clearly lay it out well in advance. They have to proactively put that out that AI was used. So these are some just few nuances that I would say, if someone is looking to set up a business up here in Canada, you have to do this homework well in advance, sooner the better, because there are so many regulations and authorities that you need prior approvals before you set it up and go forward with it.
Absolutely. And that's where I guess timing and planning become part of your strategy, because immigration and regulatory timelines rarely align with your business urgency. Moving forward, David, if expanding foreign operations into the United States, what are the tax-related issues a foreign business person should be aware of?
Thanks for that question, Mehak, but I'm going to start with a disclaimer by saying I am definitely not a tax expert. It just happens to be that tax enters into just about everything that we do, especially considering transfers to the US. And we have state, we have federal, we have local. So that, of course, that adds tremendous confusion. When an individual is seeking to open, let's say, a corporation in the United States, we have 50 states, and in any one of those states, they can open a corporation. And a lot of times the questions that we get are, well, we hear that Delaware is the best place to open up a corporation. And so oftentimes, I think that used to be the rule, because that Delaware used to have the best, the most refined body of chancery law. And they address issues of corporate nature. But I think now what's happened is that all the other states have grabbed on to the Delaware law and they use it throughout the country and they cite to those cases. So I don't know that Delaware is really the place. But there are a couple of different things that have to be thought of when you're opening up corporations in the US and transferring foreign nationals. There are a couple of types of entities, and they're driven by tax considerations. One is an S corporation, subchapter S. That is not the choice of entity for a foreign national to be coming to the United States and owning that company, because there are restrictions on foreign ownership in the subchapter S corporation. You also have a C Corp, which is a standard corporation, which is taxed at two different levels, the shareholder level and the corporate level. And then you have what's called the LLC. The LLC was created as a hybrid between the Subchapter S and the C Corp to give foreign nationals the benefit of being taxed as a partnership, but at the same time receiving the benefits of reduced exposure because by the corporate shield. So that was the limited liability company. So, so what we do as when a foreign national is thinking about bringing themselves to the United States, or a corporation is bringing them to the United States, and I just want to go back to what Gagan had mentioned, is one of the considerations has to do with trade relations. So we talk about the e-visa. The e-visa is used for foreign nationals coming to the U.S., opening up a company, and then you have the intra-company transfer, which is the L visa. And so with that, when we're helping to structure the companies, we have to consider the tax implications as well as what the future goals or trajectory for the individual is. Is it to stay? Is it to go back home? Is it to get yourself a platform here and then to return to your home country? So they're all different types of considerations. But again, I think that going back to what Leona was saying, which of course is really the most important thing, and that is having someone local and on the ground who understands the complexities of these issues is really what anyone who's coming to establish an organization in the United States really needs to consider. Back to you, Mehak.
Thank you for those golden nuggets of information, David. Because really, it's all about long-term financial implications that must be structured properly now. Moving on to aspects about talent growth and long-term strategy, Leona, how can a new business owner develop an attractive compensation package for their new team?
It's a great question because we know that from an HR perspective, if we don't pay enough, we're not going to get the talent that we need. But on the other side, we want to be mindful of our resources and also make sure that we are getting the talent that we need by paying enough. One of the things that I think is very important is to be, again, taking a look at what's happening in the local market and understanding where you're going to be able to find people. Our markets here in Canada for labor are obviously smaller than what they're going to be in many jurisdictions in the US or even in other countries. People, for instance, tend not to be so mobile for labor in Canada as what they are in the US. And part of that, I think, is just the airfares are so expensive. So, when we're looking for people, perhaps we're not looking across the country. And then, of course, if we're looking for talent and they're coming from another country, then, of course, Mahak has to get involved because that's another wrinkle to it altogether. So a lot of complexity there. But by and large, it's really around having somebody local to explain how our packages typically set up. And, what is the tax implication of some of these things? And what are some of the things that people have to worry about? And how can we make a package come together for an individual that's going to be efficient and effective and is going to be somewhat comparable to what they have already? If an organization is coming in and they really are looking for growth, they need to be aware of the fact that in Ontario and in many jurisdictions, we have laws around pay equity and pay transparency. And so when we are initially setting up our organization and setting up our levels of people within the organization, we really need to be thinking around how are we going to evaluate? How do we compare apples to oranges, which is really what pay equity is all about? That we cannot just individually run through silos. We've got to be able to compare positions based on a number of factors to make sure that the pay is appropriate and that we don't have any kind of discriminatory elements that are coming in, primarily around gender, but it can be around any number of other factors as well. So there is some complexity. I would say one of the things that's most interesting for people who are coming to Canada and setting up their businesses is really just understanding our structure, particularly around healthcare. Healthcare is something that's very different in very different countries and even how things are taxed is very different. So having that understanding at the beginning and thinking about if we really would like to retain our people, at what point are we going to bring in retirement benefits? And, what do we do that compares to what we provide already on a government level? Um, by and large, my overall take on this, it's really about having somebody local to help guide through the process. And it's also around having a very strategic focus in terms of building out those comp levels so that when you're putting something in place, it makes sense and it has some legs to it. It's going to withhold the test of time so that you don't have a lot of disparity from one level to another level. And this is what I see quite often. Thank you.
Thank you, Leona. Oftentimes, it's important to truly be able to compete in a new market and not just establish yourself as a business. And that happens by attracting and retaining the right kind of talent. Moving on, Gagan, is there a roadmap for managers to obtain temporary as well as permanent residency in Canada?
That's a very relevant question to the part of discussion that we are doing. And picking up again about Leona's comment about wages, that's also an essential part of just going back to her comments. It's so essential that even though you could be coming here as a manager and there are no minimum wages required, there's no LMIA that's needed for this position, but then it's always advisable. That's what I advise to my clients, that go back to job bank, go back, look for the wages, look for the median wages of that region, of that job location, and make sure that it's higher than the median wage. It should not be very low for sure. And there are employers who would come back and arguing and telling me back that no, there are no median wages, no minimum wages need to be given to the employees coming under ICT. But then again, the officers do go back and they do check what's the median wage of that location. And accordingly, there is an impact of that wage on the final adjudication of the application. And coming back to your question, Mehak, yes, there are short-term and long-term long-term choices for the clients or for national foreign workers who are coming to Canada either on a work permit, which could be an intra-company transfer similar to L1A that US has, or they could also be coming on a TN guided, or which is connected with one of the trade agreements. And they could be, if they are setting up their business, then they are, of course, part of another trade agreement that they could take benefit of. So yes, these work permits are options for them, which are all and mostly LMIA exempt work permits. And now we have a great news for our managers who are out here, and they could now be eligible for managerial category under express entry system. This is something very new. This was introduced just in February, March this month, and we had a first draw where the CRS score was really low as compared to usual CRS scores that we see. And it was low not just because it was more to encourage managers who are here and where age is one of the important factors. So that's what the CRS score was kept low, that they don't want to discourage managers who are here with long-term experience and they are ready to settle in Canada, bringing their managerial executive experience back from their home country into Canada. So this is one of the ways that Canada is now encouraging more and more managerial position foreign nationals to apply under this category. So yes, there are now short-term, long-term that we can obviously guide our clients on, but make sure that you are really a manager. I had a phone call where the individual was asking that I came under a different NOC code. Can I change that NOC code to meet the managerial requirements of express entry system? No, you cannot. Just to gain advantage, that's again going to come back and bite you. You have to, if you've come here on certain positions and they are not managerial, then you have a hard luck. You would rather try it under a Canadian experience class category, but not try to change the NOCs to take the benefits. So some nuances obviously there, but we are here to assist. Over to you, Mehak.
That's extremely valuable information for all managers who are already in Canada. You know what to do next. Moving forward with David, if expanding foreign businesses operations into the US, what special intellectual property issues should foreign individuals be aware of?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Mahek. And before we get to the issues of intellectual property, which are varied, one of the things that we should look to so managers understand if they're thinking about expanding operations in the U.S. I think previously I mentioned the L1, which is an intra-company transfer where you can create a new company and expand into the U.S. The E2, which is the investor visa where you can open up a company in the US and go to work for that company if you make an appropriate investment. The other door that became open, I would say fairly recently under the H-1B modernization rule was that now H-1B startups you can actually start, if you want to start your own company on an H-1B, you can do that. And that's under the modernization rules. It's not an easy thing to do. And it also only grants you 18 months as opposed to the 3 years, but it is a new opportunity and gives businesses that might be starting out, another way to bring folks or their operations to the U.S. Once they've touched ground and they are here in the U.S., then of course we have all types of issues. Of course, Leona did a great job of explaining the labor issues. There are the tax issues. There are all kinds. So, but the intellectual property one is a really important one. I think Gagan touched on it when she talked a little bit about licensing, because licensing is one way in which you can deal with intellectual property. But intellectual property takes many forms, and of course, it has to do ultimately with proprietary information or trade secrets, which is really the bread and butter, of course, of many organizations. And when an organization extends into a foreign country, of course, they have to be very careful to make sure that they're in compliance with the rules. Now, we in the United States, we have rules at the federal level, we have rules at the state level. We have something called common law, copyrights, trademarks. We don't have common law patents, but we have a federal patent protection program through the Patent and Trademark Office in Washington, D.C., where you have to register those patents. But ultimately, there are certain protections that are available for proprietary information. Most importantly, I think, and going back again to what I was saying before, and I think that Leona highlighted it, and that is that you really need someone who's an expert in this field because it's so varied and it just comes down to like, what is the difference between something that is a trademark versus a service mark? Because those things are handled differently, even at the federal level, if you're deciding to register them. And these are, I hate to say it's like splitting hairs, but people who are experts in doing this and, having the right support on the ground when you extend into that foreign country, it's so important, that you get the guidance that you need to get the appropriate protection. Back to you, Mehak.
Thank you for that, David. It's obviously important to protect intellectual property, and it'll mitigate our risks if we understand that early. Now, for our closing thoughts, I also wanted to add in a little bit of a question. So, to all of our experts today, I wanted to ask, what is the most common mistake that you've seen foreign businesses make when they're expanding their work into North America?
I can start from an HR perspective, and that is not using proper employment agreements and not understanding that there are certain covenants that they can be putting into those agreements that will help them to protect their business, particularly around intellectual property, around non-solicitation, around confidentiality. And I think that's a real missed opportunity when people don't actually at least set up that framework for themselves. And it's, often going to be a lawyer who's going to do it, which is great at the very beginning. But so often I see that people have just brought with them the agreements that they used where they were. And it really can create a lot of problems. So that's it from my HR side.
From Canadian immigration standpoint, I would say that understanding the landscape is very important. It's just not one over the other. HR perspective is just as important as setting up a business. Because if you have set up a business over here in Canada, but then you're not even aware of the regulations, compliances, then you're in hot water right there. So make sure that you understand not just the type of business that you want to establish or the business structure, but also more and more nuances that you understand about your products. That's very, very important.
Yeah, my answer to that question, Mahek, is a little less legal in nature. I'm kind of taking off my legal hat, putting on my business hat. And what I find is that the folks who want to come to a foreign country, who, let's say, are not being sent by a business abroad, don't do proper market research. They don't really know what areas that they want to get into. And then what they do is they touch down, they create the infrastructure, and then what ends up happening is they go into a business which they don't really understand the marketing and how it works. And then it ends up not doing so well. Now, there are opportunities, at least in the US, to allow them to gyrate into other types of business. So there is some flexibility. It has to be real flexibility that they're taking advantage of. But that's probably the biggest misstep that we find is that they want to come, but they don't know how to do the business to get here. So back to you.
Thank you so much to all three of you. If there's one takeaway from today for all of our audience, it should be this. Expanding into Canada or the United States is not just a business decision, it's a legal, operational, and strategic commitment. And getting the foundation right is what determines whether that expansion succeeds or fails. Now, if you found this conversation helpful, make sure to subscribe to Visa Serve Canada for more insights on immigration, business, and cross-border strategy. And go ahead and press that bell icon so you're updated every time we post a video. You can also leave your questions in the comments below, and we may address them in a future episode. If you're planning to expand your business, consider reaching out to our team for guidance. Thank you so much, and I will see you all in the next one.